Chapter 1. The Fold That Refused to be Accidental. If you have never watched a grown man argue with a piece of paper, you have missed one of the small entertainments that make New York tolerable. I have seen brokers quarrel with ticker tape, and poets threaten typewriters, but a map has a special talent for provoking dignity into nonsense. It lies there flat and calm, and the man standing over it begins to sweat as if it were alive. The Amos Keene business began on a Tuesday a little after 10 in the morning, when Fritz Brenner appeared in the office doorway with his face composed into that polite alarm he uses when the house is being asked to notice reality. "A lady wishes to see you, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "She says it concerns a death and—" "A map. A death I can understand," I told him. "A map makes it personal." Nero Wolfe was behind his desk, of course, planted in the chair like a large, thoughtful monument, with a book on his lap and his eyes half closed, as if he were saving effort for something more demanding than print. His orchids were 3 floors. Above, his beer was scheduled for noon and his temper was unspent. Those were favorable conditions, so I did not send the lady away. "Show her in," Wolfe said without looking up, which was his way of saying he would tolerate her voice if it did not stray into noise. Fritz returned with a woman in her early 30s, tall, dark-haired, and too tightly held together for grief to have had time to loosen her. Her suit was plain and good, her eyes were red at the edges, and her mouth had that stiff line I have come to associate with people who have decided they will not faint no matter what the universe offers. She gave Wolfe a quick look, then looked at me. Most clients do that. Wolfe is impressive, but I look like the man who might fetch them a glass of water without judging them for needing it, which is often more useful. "My name is Marion Keene," she said. "My father is dead." Wolfe opened his eyes. "That condition is widespread." She did not flinch. "He was not due for it. He was found this morning at his kitchen table. The police have been there. They say it may have been a heart attack. I say it was not, because my father did not die quietly and leave a lie beside his hand." "A lie?" Wolfe asked. "A map," she said. She took a large envelope from her handbag and laid it on the edge of his desk, as if placing something that might bite. This is a county map he had been studying for weeks. He folded it in a way no surveyor would fold it. Wolfe's eyes moved to the envelope, as if it were an insect. "You are certain of his professional habits?" "My father was a surveyor for 35 years, she said. "He retired, but he never stopped thinking like one. He folded maps to protect the lines he needed and hide the parts he did not. This one was folded to hide the acreage lines and show only a crooked path between scattered properties. It was as if he wanted someone to see the path and nothing else." Wolfe said, "And you brought it here instead of to the police?" "I brought it to the police," she said. "They looked at it and said it was only paper. They asked me whether my father had enemies. He did not collect enemies. He collected measurements. But lately he became obsessed with a lost parcel of land, something omitted from probate years ago. He said it was being hidden in plain sight." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Omitted from probate?" "Yes. A parcel that should have been recorded. He said it had value, not in money alone, but in what it proved." "Proved what?" "That he had been right about something nobody wanted him to be right about," she said, and her voice tightened at the end, as if the sentence had cut her. Wolfe sat back. "How did he die?" "In his kitchen, sitting upright, spectacles near one hand, the map by the other. He looked as if he had been reading, and then stopped." "Was there food?" "A cup of coffee, half finished." "Was he alone in the house?" "Yes. I live across town. I spoke to him last night at 9. He was fine, only absorbed." Wolfe looked at the envelope again. "Give me the map." She hesitated, then opened the envelope and drew out a folded sheet. It was an old county map, the kind printed on thick paper and meant to survive thumb oil and weather. The folds were crisp, not fresh, but intentional. She placed it on Wolfe's blotter. Wolfe did not touch it for a moment. He stared at it, as if deciding whether paper deserved respect. Then he took it by the edges and unfolded it, with a care that would have pleased a librarian and insulted the average policeman. He studied the fold pattern first, not the printed land. After a full minute, he said, "A map folded wrongly is often folded correctly for a different purpose." I said, "That sounds like you've been waiting years to say it." Wolfe ignored me. He looked at Marion Keene. "Did your father show this to anyone else?" "No." "Did he receive visitors lately?" "Only one," she said. "A man from a title company, or so he claimed. My father mentioned him 2 days ago. He said the man asked questions that were too careful. My father said, he wants me to say it out loud so he can deny it later." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Did your father give a name?" "He said the man called himself Joel Ritchie." Wolfe's mouth formed a small, unpleasant curve. "So, you have a death of uncertain cause and a map folded to display a path, and a supposed title man with careful questions, and you have decided it requires me." "Yes," Marion Keene said, "because my father was not careless, and because he was afraid, though he did not use the word. He kept saying, 'If I am wrong, nothing happens. If I am right, I will be noticed.' He did not like being noticed." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie?" "Yes, sir. Call Mr. Kramer. Ask him whether he has been notified of the death of Amos Keene. If he has not, tell him now, and then endure." His vocabulary. I went to the phone and called. Kramer had, of course, because in New York the police hear about a death faster than relatives do. He answered as if the line owed him money. "Kramer." "Inspector, it's Archie Goodwin. We have a client, Marion Keene. Her father, Amos Keene, was found dead this morning with a county map folded like a confession." "Heart attack is being proposed." "Proposed," Kramer growled. "That's a good word. I got a report. Old man at a kitchen table. No sign of struggle. Medical examiner says likely natural, pending." "Pending is the part we like," I said. "Miss Keene says the map was folded wrong, and a man calling himself Joel Ritchie visited 2 days ago asking title questions." There was a pause. Then Kramer said, "Ritchie, title." "All right. I'm on my way. Don't touch anything you can't explain." "I never do," I said. "It's my hobby." He hung up. I turned back to the office. Wolfe was still studying the map, and Marion Keene was watching him as if the lines on the paper might rearrange her life. Wolfe said, "Miss Keene, you must understand that eccentric folding does not constitute murder." "I understand," she said. "But it constitutes my father." Wolfe grunted. "Where do you live?" "Riverside Drive." "Do you have access to his house?" "Yes, I have a key." "Then you will take Mr. Goodwin there now. He will observe, question, and annoy as needed. If the death is natural, the case ends, and you will have the consolation of having wasted money on a detective. If it is not natural, I will decide whether it merits my time." That was Wolfe's version of encouragement. Marion Keene nodded. "Thank you." Wolfe's eyes returned to the map. "Leave the map with me." She hesitated again, then released it as if letting go hurt. I could sympathize. People cling to objects when they cannot cling to people. We left the brownstone and stepped into a brisk, late-morning city. West 35th Street had its usual mix of dignity and grime, taxis nosing, delivery men swearing at hand trucks, and a man selling pretzels as if they were salvation. Marion Keene walked beside me without looking at the street, as if the ordinary traffic offended her. On the drive uptown, she told me more. Amos Keene had been retired for 6 years and had spent most of that time doing what retired specialists do when they cannot stop. He had consulted, advised, checked old surveys for young men who believed computers had replaced measurement. He had a small cottage of paper in his house, maps and plats and county records. He had never been rich, but he had been stubborn, and stubbornness is sometimes a kind of wealth. 3 weeks ago, he had begun talking about a parcel of land in Westchester County, a small strip near a creek and a road, omitted from probate in a case 20 years earlier. He said the omission was too neat to be accidental. He said the parcel had passed like a shadow from one record to another without being named. Why does it matter? I asked. Because he said it proved fraud, Marion Keene replied. Not just someone forgetting a line. He said it was a deliberate fold in the truth. That sounded like Wolfe, and it bothered me. It meant Amos Keene had begun to talk like a man who expected trouble. The Keene house was a modest two-story place on a quiet street, tidy in the front, with a small patch of yard that had been bullied into cleanliness. Inside, it smelled of old paper, coffee, and the faint medicinal sweetness of a house where an old man lived alone and insisted he was fine. 2 uniformed men were still there, bored and not pleased to be interrupted by private curiosity. They let us in after Marion Keene showed identification, and I flashed my license in the manner of a man who has done it too often to feel pride. The kitchen was at the back. Amos Keene had been removed, but the scene remained. A wooden table, a chair pulled slightly back, a cup with cold coffee, a pair of spectacles set down carefully, not dropped. There was a faint ring on the table where the map had been. The stove was off, the sink was dry. No violence showed itself, which is often how violence prefers it. I leaned on the counter and looked around. A man can die naturally at his kitchen table. It happens in cities every day. But he rarely dies with his glasses set down as if he planned to pick them up again in 30 seconds. One of the uniforms, a young fellow with a face still innocent enough to be surprised by death, said, "They took his prints and checked the coffee. Nothing funny. The doc says heart trouble fits." "Did he have heart trouble?" Marion Keene asked. "Not that we know," the officer said. I asked, "Any sign of a visitor? Door forced? Window?" "No." "What about a call last night?" "Phone records being checked." I looked at the chair. It was turned slightly, as if Keene had shifted to see something behind him, or as if someone had stood near the doorway and he had turned to address them. "Where was the map found?" I asked. "Right there," the officer said, pointing to the ring mark. "Folded?" "Yeah. Folded. In a weird way." The officer shrugged. "It was folded. Paper does that." Marion Keene's eyes flashed. "My father did not fold paper without meaning. I liked her for that, though it might cost her." I asked to see Keene's study, and Marion led me to a small room off the hall that was more file cabinet than furniture. Maps and plats in tubes, county books on shelves, index cards, pencils, rulers, compasses. The kind of room that could make an honest man dangerous if he found the right line. On the desk, beneath a green-shaded lamp, was a notebook open to a page of neat handwriting. The top line read, "Parcel omitted, probate 2006, DeWitt Estate." Below that were references, book and page numbers, and one sentence underlined twice. "Path does not follow boundary unless boundary was moved." That was the first thing I had seen that morning that felt like a hand reaching up from the dead. Marion Keene stood beside me, hands clenched. He was writing that last night. "Did he ever say who would benefit if the boundary was moved?" I asked. "No names. Only that someone had built a crooked path through straight lines." I nodded. A crooked path had been the part the map fold exposed. Wolfe would be chewing on that upstairs in his mind, like a man tasting a sauce for poison. In the hall, footsteps sounded. Inspector Kramer arrived with 2 detectives and the air of a man stepping into a room he already disliked. He saw me, saw Marion Keene, and scowled as if we had dragged the corpse back for entertainment. "All right," he barked. "What's this about a map?" I said. "Not just a map, a fold, and a visitor named Joel Ritchie." Kramer stared. "You and your folds. Where's the body?" "Downtown," I said. "But the paper's still talking." Kramer glared at me, then at Marion Keene. "Miss Keene, you got anything besides feelings?" She looked at him steadily. "I have my father's habits and his fear." Kramer snorted. "Fear doesn't convict?" "No," I said. "It only motivates." Kramer grunted and turned to his men. Get me everything on this Joel Ritchie. Title company, address, phone, whatever. And get those county references Keene wrote down. He looked back at me. If this turns out to be nothing, I'll tell Wolfe he owes me an hour of my life. I said, he'll pay you in insults. Kramer went out, and the kitchen settled, back into its quiet. Marion Keene looked at the table, as if expecting her father to sit down again and continue writing. I said, Miss Keene, Wolfe thinks a map folded wrongly is often folded correctly for a different purpose. She nodded slowly. What purpose? That's what we find out, I said. But I'll tell you this. Your father wanted someone to see a crooked path between properties. If he did that deliberately, then he was leaving a direction, not a decoration. Outside, the city kept moving as if boundaries never mattered. Inside, in a small quiet house, a dead surveyor had left behind the one thing he trusted more than words. Lines. Chapter 2. Archie follows the properties, not the land. If you want to understand why people commit respectable sins, you do not begin in a bar or a courtroom. You begin in an office where the furniture is ashamed of itself and the paper is proud. Records have a clean smell. They sit in drawers and pretend they were born honest. The trouble is that men use them, and men have hobbies. I left the Keene house with two things in my pocket that were not mine. One was a page of Amos Keene's notebook, copied carefully in my own hand, with the probate reference and his underlined sentence about a path not following a boundary unless the boundary had moved. The other was a small list Marion had given me of the names her father had muttered over the last 2 weeks, not in accusation, but in the way a surveyor names points on a map. They were not dramatic names. DeWitt, Crandall, Hoxie, Laird, Tompkins. Names that could belong to gravestones, not villains. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report with his eyes half shut, as if the words were smoke, and he was sorting out which part might be fire. He had Marion Keene's map laid out on his desk, held down by a paperweight. He actually liked, which is rare. He did not ask how the coffee at Keene's had tasted or what the uniforms had thought. Wolfe never asks about what he considers decorative. What are the properties? He asked. I handed him my list. At least 5. A farm outside Harmon, a small house near Cortlandt, 2 parcels of woodland on the edge of an old quarry, and an abandoned mill site by a creek. Wolfe opened his eyes. An abandoned mill is rarely abandoned. It is merely silent. Kramer is running the name Joel Ritchie, I said, the title company visitor. Yes. Meanwhile, you will go where records pretend to be honest. City records or county. Begin in the city. A man who conceals a parcel in probate may also conceal other things. Also, you are in New York. Respect the inconvenience. That was Wolfe's idea of a joke. So I went downtown. The first stop was the clerk's office that holds old probate files like grudges. The room was warm, crowded, and filled with people who had come to discover that paperwork outlives affection. I asked for the DeWitt estate file, the one Keene had referenced, and a clerk with tired eyes told me it would take time because the file had been moved to storage. I told him I had time and money, which is a more effective combination than charm. After an hour and a half, and after I had watched 3 families learn something unpleasant about one another, the file arrived. It was a thick folder that had the satisfied look of a thing that had ruined several weekends. DeWitt Estate opened. 20 years earlier, closed 14 years earlier, reopened briefly for an amendment, then sealed with the bureaucratic certainty that the dead do not argue well. There was no missing parcel in the ordinary sense. Every tract named in the inventory was described, measured, and assigned. A small home, a strip of woodland, an interest in the mill property, a bank account, a life insurance policy, and one debt that had been written in the mild language of cousins lending cousins money. But what struck me was not absence. It was pattern. The mill property, which looked worthless on paper, had been assigned not to the heir who received the house or the heir who received the farm, but to a niece who lived in Manhattan and married Martin Laird 6 months after the probate closed. The woodland strip had been mortgaged twice in 5 years and released both times without ever being sold. The debt had been repaid through a mortgage payoff that did not mention the debt at all. That may sound ordinary. It is ordinary. Ordinary is how people hide things. I copied dates and names and then went to the city registrar's office for marriage records. That was where the story began to feel less like land and more like thread. The niece, Elise DeWitt, had married Martin Laird, age 32, occupation listed as investor. That always means either money or ambition. 2 years later, a Clara Laird had married a Jonathan Crandall, and the witness signature on the license was Martin Laird. 10 years after that, a Dana Crandall had married a Peter Tompkins, and the witness signature was a man named Hoxie. It was not scandal yet. It was a web. Marriages, mortgages, and quiet debt passing between names like thread through old cloth, tying farms, houses, and a mill into a private arrangement. I went back to real property deeds, and the web tightened. Every property on Keene's list had at some point touched one of the other names, not by boundary but by paper, a mortgage held by a cousin's business, a lien released by a spouse's attorney, a right-of-way granted not because a farmer needed it, but because someone wanted a line drawn legally between 2 points. The abandoned mill, silent as Wolfe had predicted, was the hub, not valuable as land, but valuable as connection. By 3 o'clock I had a headache and a stack of notes, and I had still not found a missing parcel, which made me more confident I was looking at the right problem. I took a cab back to the brownstone, fought traffic, and found Wolfe in the office with the map still on his desk, and his expression sharpened by interest. He did not ask about my headache. Well, he said, I sat at my desk and laid out the day's haul. No parcel is missing in the ordinary way. Every tract in the DeWitt probate is accounted for. But the properties Keene was looking at are linked by family arrangements, not borders. Marriages, mortgages, and private debt. Names repeat. Laird, Crandall, Hoxie, Tompkins. The mill property keeps changing hands inside the circle, and the woodland strips get mortgaged and released like they are being used as tokens. Wolfe's eyes moved from me to the map. Describe the path the fold exposes. I stood and leaned over the map, pointing. It runs from the DeWitt farm tract to the mill site, then along the creek to the woodland strip, then across to the Crandall house parcel, and ends at a small road that touches the quarry edge. Wolfe grunted. It is not a boundary line. No, it's a route. Routes, Wolfe said, exist for movement. Exactly, I said. And that movement isn't just a man walking. It's paper moving, debt moving, favors moving. Nobody sold the mill because it was profitable. They held it because it connected them. Wolfe picked up a pencil and tapped it once on the map. A surveyor would not fold to hide acreage lines unless he wished to deny the land itself. He wished to display relationships between properties, between people, Wolfe corrected. Land does not scheme. People do. I sat back. The odd part is how neat it is. The same few names keep appearing across years, but always in legal forms that look innocent. A mortgage here, a lien there, a right-of-way that makes no practical sense. Wolfe said, a right-of-way is a confession of intended passage. There's a right-of-way recorded in the DeWitt file, I said. Granted over the mill parcel for access to the creek. The language is old and careful. It is not for fishing, it's for transit. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And the title company man, Joel Ritchie, asked questions that were too careful. Yes, according to Marion. Wolfe leaned back, hands on his chair arms. Then Amos Keene was tracing movement, not ownership. I said, meaning the lost parcel isn't a missing piece of land. It's a missing acknowledgement of something that moved through that route, or something that was made to appear not to move, Wolfe said. In either case, the map fold displays a path because the path is the story, I nodded. So what could have moved along a creek and through an abandoned mill that would still matter 20 years later? Wolfe looked at me as if I had asked, why bread is edible? Money. documents, objects, stolen property, or the bodies of those who wish to be forgotten. But we must not indulge melodrama. Not even a little. No, Wolfe said. However, a mill and a creek and a private legal web suggest concealment. The question is, what Keene discovered that made him afraid enough to be noticed? The phone rang. I answered. It was Kramer. We found your title company visitor, he said. No such man at any reputable outfit. Name is real enough, but he's not in the trade. He's got a record for fraud upstate and a talent for changing addresses. That's cheerful, I said. Where is he now? Unknown. But here's the part you'll like. Keene called the county clerk last week, asking for copies of old right-of-way filings tied to the mill. Someone else called the next day asking whether Keene had asked, that someone used a blocked number. I looked at Wolfe, who had been listening to my half of it, as if hearing Kramer through the air. Thank you, I told Kramer. If you find. Richie, try not to break him until Wolfe has had the pleasure. Kramer snorted and hung up. I relayed it. Wolfe nodded. So Keene's inquiry triggered surveillance. That indicates he touched something guarded. Still no missing parcel. I said. Wolfe said, the missing parcel was a theory he used to keep his mind disciplined. He was a surveyor. He thinks in parcels. But what he found was not land omitted. It was movement concealed. And he folded the map to show the route. Yes. I leaned back at my desk and tried to see it as Keene had seen it. Not acres, not boundaries, but a crooked path connecting scattered properties that belonged to a small circle of names. A web you could not see by looking at the land, only by looking at the paper. Wolfe said, Archie, tomorrow you will go to the properties. Themselves. You mean leave Manhattan? Yes, I sighed. You do know that's against my religion. Your religion is laziness. It is flexible. I'll need a car. Use mine, Wolfe said, which meant the house was now invested. Take Miss Keene. A daughter is useful. People speak more freely to grief than to curiosity. I stood. Anything else? Yes, Wolfe said. Stop thinking like a surveyor. Think like a thief. That was enough to spoil my evening in advance. As Fritz announced dinner, the city outside went on being itself, loud, busy, and certain it owned its streets. Up in Westchester, a quiet set of properties, linked by family and paper, had been forming a private route for years. Amos Keene had finally traced it, and now he was dead at his kitchen table with his spectacles set down as if he intended to pick them up again in a moment. A map folded wrongly is often folded correctly for a different purpose. Wolfe had said that. Now he had added the second part without saying it aloud. When someone folds a map to show a route, it is because they expect a journey. And in our business, journeys rarely end where the paper says they should. Chapter 3. The dead man was measuring a story. Wolfe loaning me his car is not generosity. It is strategy. He dislikes travel, so when he permits me to take the big sedan, it means he expects the road to pay him back in information, not scenery. By 9:30 the next morning, Marion Keene was on the front step of the brownstone, gloved, composed, and carrying a paper folder like a shield. The air had that early spring bite that makes a man feel he has been drafted by weather. Fritz watched us go with the expression of a man who believed Westchester was too far for any decent errand, and that my return would probably interfere with dinner in some new way. Wolfe was in the office, of course, already settled, with the folded map on his desk, like a patient under examination. He did not look up as we passed. Archie, he said, do not measure land. Yes, sir. Measure intention. That was the last blessing. Marion and I drove out of the city through traffic that behaved as if it had been trained to resent every destination. As the buildings thinned, the world did that quiet widening it does outside Manhattan, like a man loosening his collar. Marion stared out the window, not at the scenery, but through it. You never liked leaving the city, she said. I like it fine, I told her. I just don't trust it. The city lies openly. The country lies politely. She did not smile. My father trusted maps. He trusted lines, I said. He trusted what a man could point to and say, "Here." That was his comfort. And, "Now," I said, "it's our problem." We had a list of 5 properties from the probate file and the map fold. We were not looking for a missing parcel, not anymore. We were looking for what those properties had been used to connect. Wolfe had made that clear with his remark about thinking like a thief. Thieves care less about boundaries than about routes. The first stop was the abandoned mill site, because Wolfe had called it the hub before I'd even seen it. It lay off a narrow road by a creek, a low stone foundation half swallowed by weeds, with a rusted wheel mechanism like a jaw left open. It was quiet the way neglected places are quiet, not peaceful but wary. Marion stepped out and looked around. "He came here last week." "How do you know?" She opened her folder and showed me a note in Amos Keene's hand, dates and shorthand, and beside one date, "Mill looked wrong." "Wrong how?" She shook her head. "He never explained. He only said the mill was the kind of wrong that doesn't age." We walked the perimeter. There was nothing romantic. Old stone. Old rot. A padlocked shed built later, newer lumber, a private warning sign on it with the name Tompkins printed. At the bottom, Peter Tompkins, one of the names. The mill wasn't abandoned to everyone, only to those without keys. A pickup truck came up the road and stopped. The driver leaned out, a heavy man in a work jacket, with a face that had been weathered into suspicion. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I showed my license and gave him the short version. He did not soften, but he listened. "This is private property," he said. "Most murder motives are," I told him. He looked at Marion and then away, as if grief made him uneasy. "Tompkins owns this. He leases the shed to a storage outfit. Nothing to do with me." "Do you work for Tompkins?" I asked. "No." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. "I hunt up the ridge." "In March?" He shrugged. "Coyotes don't read calendars." I asked his name. He gave it as Hoxie, which made my ears sit up. It was one of the names in my web of marriages and mortgages, related to the Hoxie who witnessed a marriage license. I asked. His eyes narrowed. "Maybe." "Then you're in the cloth," I said, "which means you'll answer a few things. Did Amos Keene come here last week?" Hoxie grunted. "Old man came, yes. Walked around like he was counting ghosts." I asked what he wanted. He said he was verifying a line. "What line?" He said a line that was supposed to be straight. "Did he mention Tompkins?" "No." "Did he mention a dispute?" He spat to the side. "He said probate was a lie that got dressed up and signed." That sounded like Amos Keene, and it sounded like trouble. I asked Hoxie whether anyone else had been asking about Keene. Hoxie said, "A man came 2 days ago, city man, too clean. Asked if Keene had been here. I told him to go ask the dead. Description? Mid-30s, hair slick, eyes busy, could be our Joel Ritchie, could be another rat in a suit. We left the mill and drove to the DeWitt farm tract, now run by a cousin named Crandall. The farmhouse was plain, the land orderly, and the man who met us at the gate had the look of someone who would rather fight with weather than with people. He was Jonathan Crandall, and he did not like questions. "I knew Amos Keene," he said. "He surveyed for my uncle years back. He was thorough and irritating. If he died of a heart attack, it was from being right too often." "Did he come here recently?" I asked. Crandall hesitated, then nodded. "Last Friday." "Why?" "He said he wanted to see the old easement line." "Which one?" Crandall's mouth tightened. "The one that runs from the creek to the road. Nobody uses it. It's just paper." "Paper matters," Marion said, and for the first time her voice had heat. Crandall looked at her. "You're his daughter?" "Yes." He softened a fraction, which was still a hard man. He asked questions like a man trying to remember a fight. He asked who had pushed for closing the DeWitt probate so fast. "Who did?" I asked. Crandall looked away toward the fields. "Martin Laird. He married Elise DeWitt. He had a lawyer friend. They wrapped it up quick. Folks said it was nice, no quarrels." I said it was suspicious. Why? Marion asked. Crandall shrugged. When there's land and family, there's always a quarrel. If there isn't, somebody got paid to swallow one. We drove next to the small house parcel near Cortlandt. It belonged now to a woman named Dana Tompkins, married to Peter Tompkins, and the place had the guarded look of property held as a token rather than a home. A woman answered the door, polite and tight around the eyes. "I'm not interested," she said as soon as I began. I told her about Amos Keene's death. That changed her color slightly, but not her posture. "I didn't know him," she said. "You did," Marion said. "You knew his work. My father corrected your deed line 3 years ago when your bank rejected it." The woman blinked, irritated to be pinned. "He was an old surveyor. He came, he measured, he left." "Did he come again recently?" I asked. "No." "Did anyone else come asking about old easements?" "No." She was lying, but she was lying neatly. I pressed. "Mrs. Tompkins," I said, "my boss thinks your family has been moving something through these properties for 20 years. Not land, something else. Amos Keene traced the route and died with a map folded to show it. If you know. What he found now is the time to stop playing tidy." Her face sharpened. "Your boss should mind his own affairs." "He does," I said. "That's why you're nervous." She said, "Leave." We did, but I had a note in my book. Fear, controlled, in the Tompkins house. On the drive back toward the Creek Road, Marion was silent. Then she said, "My father used to say a deed is a story a man tells the government. An easement is a story he tells his neighbor. And probate," I said, "is a story told by survivors." She nodded. He kept rereading those papers, as if correcting memory. That was exactly it. The more I learned, the less Keene's last work looked like a hunt for forgotten real estate. He had been revisiting old deeds, inheritance papers, easement maps and mortgage releases like a man trying to fix a narrative. As if land itself had not changed, but the account of it had. We stopped once more at the Mill Road, not to trespass, but to watch. A second vehicle came in, a sedan, dark, city clean, moving too carefully. It slowed when it saw us and then continued past without stopping. The driver did not look at us, which meant he had. The license plate was New York, not county. That could be your Joel Ritchie, Marion said. Or a cousin in a hurry, I said. Either way, it means the mill is still used, not abandoned. We returned to the city by late afternoon with mud on the tires and a story forming behind it. I brought Marion to the brownstone, left her in the front room with Fritz's cautious hospitality, and went to the office. Wolfe had the map open and my notes from yesterday stacked beside it. He looked up once, which meant he was interested, enough to be impatient. "Well?" he asked. I gave it to him in order, because Wolfe appreciates sequence almost as much as he appreciates being right. The mill is abandoned, but there's a padlocked shed with Tompkins' name on the sign. A man named Hoxie was there, claims hunting. He says Keene came last week and called probate a lie dressed up and signed. Hoxie also says a Clean City man came 2 days ago asking if Keene had been there. Could match the title company visitor. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Proceed. Crandall confirms Keene visited the DeWitt farm tract last Friday, asking about the easement line and who pushed to close the probate fast. Crandall says Martin Laird did, after marrying Elise DeWitt, with a lawyer. Friend, he found the speed suspicious. Wolfe grunted. Tompkins' house is tight, I continued. Dana Tompkins denies knowing Keene recently, but she's lying clean. The fear is controlled. The mill site still attracts traffic. A dark sedan came by, too clean for that road. Wolfe sat back. So the route is active. Yes. And Keene wasn't measuring land. He was measuring a story. He revisited easements and probate timing as if correcting memory. Wolfe nodded. Maps conceal intention under the pretense of direction. That's your line, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. It remains correct. I sat at my desk. No parcel is missing, but the route is too neat. It crosses properties, connected by family arrangements and legal threads. The probate ended too quickly. The easement line exists more on paper than on ground. The mill is a hub. Something moved, Wolfe said. Or something happened. I looked at him. A buried event, yes, Wolfe said. A buried event wrapped in legal paperwork and disguised as routine transfer. The phone rang. I answered. Kramer. We tracked one Joel Ritchie to a rooming house on 10th Avenue, he said. He left yesterday, but we found a receipt in his room. Photocopy charge at a print shop. Guess what he copied? Don't tease me, I said. Old easement map, Westchester, Mill Road, and the name on the order form was Martin Laird. I looked at Wolfe and held up a finger. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. I relayed it. Wolfe nodded slowly. So, Mr. Ritchie is a tool, not a master. Martin Laird is the name to watch. I said, how do we connect it to Amos Keene dying at a kitchen table? Wolfe's voice stayed even. By discovering what Keene was about to say out loud. He folded the map to show a route. That route points toward an event. Someone feared the event becoming spoken, because spoken events become legal events. I leaned back. You think he was poisoned? I think he was silenced, Wolfe said. Method awaits evidence, but motive grows clearer. A web of family and property arrangements has protected something for 20 years. Amos Keene traced it. Then he died with spectacles set down as if he had been interrupted. I thought of the chair angle in the kitchen. He may have been interrupted. Yes, Wolfe said, and the interruption did not need to be loud. A knock, a voice, a familiar name. In such houses, politeness is enough to open doors. He stood, which meant the case had begun to grip him beyond paper. Archie, bring Mr. Laird to me. That's ambitious. Yes, Wolfe said. Ambition is often necessary. Also bring Miss Keene, and inform Mr. Kramer that I will require his attendance tomorrow afternoon. I intend to open this matter in my office. I smiled. Already? We're only at chapter 3. Wolfe looked offended. Do not be ridiculous. We are at the point where ignorance can no longer pretend to be safety. As I left to make calls, the map lay on Wolfe's desk, its strange fold now less a quirk than a finger pointing. It did not point to a missing parcel of land. It pointed to a buried event, something that had moved along that crooked route and been sealed in paper ever since. Amos Keene had been measuring a story, and someone had decided the story must stop at his kitchen table. Chapter 4. The clerk who filed too smoothly. The courthouse in White Plains has the same smell as courthouses. Everywhere paper, varnish, and impatience. Men go there to prove they are right, and usually leave with proof they are tired. I went to find a clerk. Marion Keene wanted to come, and for once her presence was not merely emotional decoration. A daughter with controlled anger can make a public servant remember details he would prefer to misplace. We took Wolfe's car again and reached the building a little after 10, when the day's supply of optimism had already been used up by the first line at the window. Walter Bryce was not hard to locate. Clerks like him are never far from a counter, because counters allow them to be important without standing. He was in his late 50s, neat, grey at the temples, with a face that had learned to remain neutral while judging everyone. His tie was straight, his hands were clean, his eyes were quick and practiced. I introduced myself and Marion. I told him we were looking at the DeWitt estate file because Amos Keene had been studying it before his death. Bryce nodded at once. Too quickly, yes, he said. Amos Keene, surveyor, I remember him. That was my first itch. Most clerks remember frequent nuisances. They do not remember a retired surveyor from a case 20 years old unless something has polished the memory. You remember the probate too? I asked. Certainly, Bryce said. DeWitt estate. A little complicated, but properly handled. Who? Was administrator, I asked. Elise DeWitt. Then her husband, Martin Laird, assisted with counsel. Name of counsel? Bryce smiled slightly. Mr. Laird used Jameson Pierce. He was active then. He said it as if reading from the file in his head, not as if recalling. That made me more interested, not less. Marion said, My father believed something was omitted, Bryce's smile stayed smooth. Nothing was omitted, miss. The estate was closed properly. Then why was he studying it? She demanded. Bryce shrugged with sympathy practiced over decades. People study old papers when they have regrets. I leaned my elbows on the counter. Or when they have questions. Bryce's eyes met mine. You may examine the file. It is public. I already did, I told him. In the city. I'm B. Here for the bound ledger, the index book, and the filing history. His smile thinned. Those are internal records. Internal records often tell the external truth, I said. And my boss is expensive. He dislikes wasted drives. Bryce hesitated. That was good. A clerk who never hesitates is either saintly or rehearsed. He said, What exactly do you want? The transfer that assigned the mill interest to Elise DeWitt and then to Martin Laird's circle, I said. The timing, the entry date, and the source page. Bryce's mouth tightened. Everything was entered when received. Try again, I said. Because my notes show one transfer recorded months after the probate closed. That made Marion look at me sharply. I had not told her that, because I had wanted Bryce's face first. Bryce blinked once. A supplemental entry. Months late, I said. It happens. Not in probate that was closed too smoothly, I said. Bryce stared at me with the mild hostility of a man who believes his desk grants him superiority. Then he turned and said, Wait. He disappeared into the back, leaving us with a view of the counter and a sense that we had touched a nerve that could still feel after 20 years. Marion said softly, You think he's lying? I think he's remembering, I said. 2. Well? Bryce returned with a large bound volume, thick and worn, and placed it on the counter with care. This is the ledger of recorded transfers for that period, he said. You may look, but do not mark it. I opened it and began turning pages. The entries were neat, the handwriting consistent, the dates aligned. It was routine, which is how trouble survives. I found the DeWitt entries, and there it was. A transfer of easement rights tied to the mill and creek route. The recorded date was 6 months after the probate had been closed. The entry itself referenced a previous page number, as if copied from an earlier record. The earlier page number, when I flipped back, did not exist. The ledger jumped. A leaf had been removed, and the numbering adjusted in ink with a careful hand. I looked up at Bryce. That page is missing, I said. Bryce nodded smoothly. It was damaged and replaced. Replaced how? I asked. Copied into the later entry. Copied from what? Marion demanded. If the page is gone, Bryce's smile held, from the original filing. Which is stored where? I asked. Bryce hesitated again. In archives. How convenient, I said. A page is missing from a bound ledger, and the missing content is recreated months later from an original nobody can see quickly. Bryce's face tightened. You are implying misconduct. I'm implying arithmetic, I said. And paper. My boss believes both are more honest than people. Marion leaned forward. My father was studying that time period, the stretch covered by the missing page. Why would he care unless something happened then? Bryce looked at her, and for the first time the smoothness cracked a fraction. Miss Keene, your father was a surveyor. He did not understand filing practice. My father understood lies, she said. Bryce's eyes flicked away. That was enough. I copied the dates, the reference numbers, and the note in the margin that indicated the page had been replaced due to damage. The handwriting of that note did not match the handwriting of the original entries. It was Bryce's, or at least it was modern. Who wrote this margin note? I asked. Bryce said, I did, when I took over the ledger. When was that? 10 years ago. So you wrote a note about an event 20 years old, I said, and you remember all of it with a smoothness that would make a priest jealous. Bryce's lips pressed together. I remember because people keep asking about it. Who keeps asking? I asked. He did not answer at once. Then he said, occasionally attorneys. Such as Martin Laird, I said. Bryce's eyes sharpened. Mr. Laird has inquired. How recently? Marion asked. Bryce hesitated. Last week. That landed between us. Last week, I repeated. And my father was studying it last week. And then he was dead. Bryce's voice hardened. I am not responsible for your father's health. No, I said. But you are responsible for your ledger. And your ledger has a missing page. Bryce drew himself up. That page was damaged years ago. It had nothing to do with Amos Keene. You don't know what it had to do with, Marion said. You only know you want it to be finished. Bryce's smoothness returned with effort. I have given you access. I will give no more. I did not argue. You do not win against a clerk by shouting. You win by collecting the right scraps and letting the right people shout later. Outside in the courthouse corridor, Marion stopped and leaned against the wall, eyes shut. He was hiding something, she said. He was guarding something, I corrected. Hiding is for criminals. Clerks guard because they like the feeling. We drove back toward the city, and I telephoned Wolfe from a payphone near the parking lot because the courthouse reception had the consistency of pudding. Wolfe answered on the second ring. Yes. It's Archie. We found your missing page. Or rather, its absence. Courthouse clerk Walter Bryce remembers the DeWitt probate with a smoothness that should be taxed. He insists filings were proper, but one transfer was entered 6 months late and copied from a page no longer in the bound ledger. That missing ledger page covers the same time stretch Keene was studying before he died. Silence, then Wolfe said. Describe Bryce. Neat. Practiced. Too quick to remember names and counsel. Knows Martin Laird's lawyer from 20 years. Ago like it was yesterday. Wrote a margin note 10 years ago about damage to the missing page. Why does he remember? Because people keep asking, I said. Bryce admits Laird asked last week. Wolfe grunted. And Keene asked last week. Yes. Wolfe's voice turned slightly colder. When a clerk remembers too well, it is often because he has had years to rehearse. Bring me his name, his address, and any record of disciplinary matters. Also, bring the ledger references and the late entry details. I have them. Good. Archie, the missing parcel was Neverland. It was a page, or what the page concealed. An event, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. A buried event, papered over, then protected by repetition. Now it has killed a man. I hung up and watched Marion Keene stand by the car, looking out at the courthouse as if it had personally insulted her father. Back in New York, Wolfe sat with the map, my notes, and now Bryce's rehearsed memory added to the pile. He did not need me to explain what it meant. A transfer entered months late, copied from a page no longer in the bound ledger and guarded by a clerk who remembered too smoothly. Amos Keene had been measuring a story, Walter Bryce had been filing it, and someone had decided the story had been filed long enough. Chapter 5. The boundary marker in the weeds. There are days when New York feels like the only honest place on earth because it lies without pretending otherwise. Then there are days when a quiet lane in Westchester can make you miss traffic, because a quiet lane can lie politely and expect you to thank it. Wolfe had sent me back out of the city with 2 instructions and 1 irritation. The instructions were to find the physical point Amos Keene had been aiming at and to bring back something solid enough that even a clerk could not smooth it away. The irritation was that Wolfe himself could not go, and he disliked depending on my legs. Find a hard bone, he said. Paper is obedient. Metal is not. So Marion Keene and I went again. We drove north under a sky that looked undecided, and the world outside the city turned green in small, cautious patches. Marion sat straight beside me, silent most of the way, as if she believed words might be wasted on land that had already been allowed to lie. The lane was not on any tourist map. It was a weed-choked strip that could once have been a service road, running between 2 stands of scrub and ending near the creek behind the abandoned mill property. On Amos Keene's notes, It had been described without poetry. Old lane, marker, wrong. We parked on the shoulder and walked in. The weeds were high enough to hide a small dog and ambitious enough to hide a body. The ground had the spongy feel of a place that holds water when no one is watching. Somewhere beyond, the creek made a soft sound like paper being torn slowly. Marion stopped after 50 yards and pointed. There. At first I saw nothing but weeds. Then the weeds moved slightly as if embarrassed, and I saw a rusted iron post, half buried, leaning at an angle that suggested surrender. It had a flat top and faint stamped markings, too worn to read without effort. "That's a boundary marker?" I asked. "Yes," Marion said. "My father used posts like that early in his career. Old county issue. He told me once they were supposed to be dull so nobody would steal them for souvenirs." This one had succeeded. It looked like nothing worth stealing, and yet it was more valuable to us than any deed. I knelt and brushed weeds away with my hands. The base was set in old packed earth, not recently driven. It had been there a long time. That was the first comfort. A recently moved marker usually leaves a scar. This one looked old enough to be mistaken for truth. Then I looked at where it stood. The lane ran straight for a short distance, then bent slightly toward the creek. The marker was not at the bend, not at a corner, not at a point that naturally declared anything. It was placed as if someone had wanted a line to cross the lane at exactly that spot, regardless of whether the land agreed. I stood and scanned the surroundings. To the left, toward the ridge, the ground rose into brush and thin trees. To the right, it dropped toward the creek. There was no fence, no stone wall, no sign of anyone caring where one property ended and another began. And yet this marker insisted it mattered. Marion opened her folder and handed me a photocopy of a sketch her father had made. It showed the lane, the creek, and the marker. Beside it, he had written, "Placement nonsense unless line moved after." I said, "He found it recently." "Yes. He came home with mud on his shoes, which was unusual, and he was excited in a quiet way. He said, 'They left the bone in the weeds.' That means someone thought nobody would look." "He looked," Marion said. "And then he died." I walked a slow circle around the marker, counting steps, looking for corroboration. Surveyors leave witnesses like an honest man leaves fingerprints. I found 2 old stones half covered by moss that could once have been used as reference points. They formed a rough angle with the marker. If you ran a line through them, it would cut the lane and continue toward the mill foundation, and then beyond it, toward a stretch of creek bank that was hidden from the road by a low rise and thick brush. It matched the route the map fold exposed. I said, "This is your father's." Crooked path made metal. Marion's jaw tightened. "So the line was moved." "Or claimed to be moved," I said. "Either way, it was drawn to guide something." We followed the implied line, not by measuring like surveyors, but by looking like thieves. The ground dropped, the weeds thickened, and the creek grew louder. We passed the mill foundation, grey stones sunk like old teeth, and then reached a point where the bank widened into a small flat area hidden by brush. From the road you would never see it. From the creek you might. The earth there looked different. Not disturbed recently, but odd. The soil was darker and packed in a way that suggested it had once been worked and then left to settle. Near the edge, half buried, was a chunk of rotten timber that might have been part of an old dock or a bridge. Support. There were also shards of rusted metal, not large, not meaningful alone, but enough to hint at something that had been dragged, dropped, or left. Marion stood still. He was pointing here. "Yes," I said. "What is it?" "A place," I told her. "The kind of place people choose when they do not want to be seen." She looked at me sharply. "You mean a burial?" "I mean an event," I said. "Not necessarily a grave. But Wolfe thinks the land was redrawn not to enlarge. An estate, but to cover where someone had once gone and never returned." She swallowed. "My father believed the parcel was lost. He was using parcel language for a story," I said. This is the story's setting. We did not dig. I am willing to be stubborn, but I am not willing to be arrested for landscaping. Instead, I did what Wolfe would have called intelligent restraint and what I would have called fear of paperwork. I took photographs, measured approximate distances with my own steps, and noted sightlines. From the flat by the creek, you could not see the road. From the road, you could not see the flat. From the mill, you could see both if you stood in the right spot. That was a corridor, not of land, but of invisibility. On our way back up the lane, a car rolled slowly past the road entrance. A dark sedan, city clean. It did not stop, but it did not rush either. The driver's head turned just enough to confirm he had seen us. Then it continued. Marion watched it go. They're still watching. Yes, I said. Which means we stepped on a live wire. Back in the city, I went straight to the brownstone and into the office. Wolfe was at his desk, with the map open and his eyes on it as if he expected it to confess. Well, he demanded. I did not waste time. I gave him the marker, the placement, the nonsense of it as a true boundary point, the alignment with the folded map route and the hidden flat by the creek bank. I showed him photographs. He studied them without comment, which for Wolfe is comment. Finally he said, yes. That's comforting, I told him. It is confirmation, Wolfe said. Your rusted marker is the first hard bone. Keene uncovered it and recognized that its placement made no sense unless a line had been shifted or claimed to be shifted after the fact. Not to gain land, I said. No, Wolfe agreed. Not to enlarge an estate. The acreage involved is trivial compared to the risk. The line was redrawn to control attention. It directs the route past the mill and toward a point on the creek bank hidden from the road. Marion, who had waited in the front room and was now brought in by Fritz, listened with rigid focus. Wolfe looked at her. Miss Keene, your father, was not searching for property. He was searching for an act that had been disguised as property. A clerk can misfile a page. A family can rearrange deeds. But a marker in the weeds is a confession left behind by carelessness or arrogance. Marion said, So someone died there. Wolfe's expression remained steady. It is likely someone went there and did not return, or returned in a form that required paper to conceal. Your father traced the concealment, then died. That is, motive enough for a murderer who believes time has made him safe. I said, What now? Wolfe leaned back. Now we force the story into the open. We have Bryce and his missing ledger page. We have Martin Laird hiring a fraud named Ritchie to copy easement maps. We have a physical marker that contradicts the narrative. And we have a hidden place the route points toward. Kramer arrived then, as if summoned by the word narrative. He came in scowling and stopped when he saw Marion Keene in the office. He did not like private citizens sitting in on police business, but he disliked being wrong more. Wolfe told him about the marker and the creek bank flat. Kramer listened, his face shifting through skepticism, irritation, and interest in that order. You're telling me someone moved a line to hide a body, he said. I am telling you, Wolfe replied, that the line was adjusted to conceal an event. Daniel Orr's body is the most likely event. You will send men to that creek bank and you will do it quietly. No shovels in daylight, no shouting, no reporters. Kramer grunted. You don't run my squad. No, Wolfe said. But I do run my logic. If you wish to keep up, obey it. Kramer looked at me as if asking whether it was worth arguing. I shrugged. When Wolfe is right, arguing wastes time. After Kramer left, Wolfe sat in silence for a moment, eyes on the map, then on my photographs. A surveyor's gift, he said, is that he cannot accept a line merely because it is drawn. He must know why it lies where it lies. Amos Keene found a marker that refused to be reasonable. He understood that it was not marking land, but marking intention. Marion's eyes filled, not with tears yet, but with something close. He was measuring a story. Yes, Wolfe said, and he paid for it. Wolfe's voice softened only by precision. He died because he was about to turn a buried event into a spoken one. That is the danger of truth. It travels. I stood and looked at the photographs again. A rusted post in weeds, a lane nobody used, a creek bank hidden from the road, a line that did not serve farming, only secrecy. New York likes its crimes crowded and noisy. Westchester had chosen quiet. But quiet can be as deliberate as a gunshot, and sometimes more expensive to undo. Wolfe said, "Archie, tomorrow we bring Martin Laird here." I said, "Voluntarily?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Preferably. But truth often requires inducement." "And Walter Bryce?" "Yes. And Mr. Kramer. And Miss Keene. We will not solve this by digging in mud. We will solve it by compelling words. To match lines." He looked at the map again. "The land was taught to lie," he said. "Now we will make it testify." Chapter 6. The schoolteacher remembers too kindly. You can learn more from a kindly old woman than from a belligerent lawyer if you pick the right kindly old woman. Lawyers are paid to remember, and they remember in paragraphs. Old women remember in instincts, and sometimes they remember what they have been instructed to remember so often it shines. Wolfe sent me after Helen Crow with the same tone he uses when he tells me to fetch milk, as if the errand were simple and the result guaranteed. Find the vanished witness, he said, or find the story that replaced him. "We already have a vanished witness?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes lifted. "Archie, you have a creek bank, a boundary marker placed to direct attention, a probate closed too smoothly, and a ledger page that disappeared. Those things do not exist without a human being who once saw something and then ceased to be convenient. Names persist, even when bodies do not. Get me the name." Kramer's men had provided it by noon, grudgingly, because the name had been sitting in an old note on an old file, and the only reason it had not been noticed sooner was that nobody respects old files unless they are trying to bury something. Daniel, or farmhand, listed once in a statement summary as present near Mill Lane on evening of quarrel, then no more. The trouble with vanished witnesses is that they vanish at the worst time. The advantage is that somebody always remembers them because somebody has rehearsed the explanation for their absence. Helen Crow lived in a small house outside Harmon, where the lawns are clipped and the porch railings look as if they have never had an argument. Marion Keene came with me, partly because Wolfe insisted, and partly because she had begun to understand that grief is sometimes a key. She sat in the passenger seat of the sedan, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead, as if she were driving by willpower alone. Helen Crow answered the door herself. She was in her late 70s, small, straight-backed and careful, with white hair arranged neatly and eyes bright enough to have graded half the county. She looked at Marion and softened at once, which is what good teachers do. They recognize hurt before it speaks. "Miss Keene," she said, "I'm so sorry about Amos. He was such a precise man." "He was," Marion said. "May we come in?" Helen Crow led us into a tidy front room with a faint smell of lemon polish and the quiet authority of someone who has kept the same habits for 50 years and expects the world to respect them. She offered tea. I declined. Marion accepted, mostly to be polite. When Crow sat, she folded her hands like a woman beginning a lesson. "I know why you're here," she said. "It's about the old trouble, isn't it?" "That depends," I said. "Do you remember Daniel Orr?" Her face brightened with certainty that arrived too quickly. "Of course. Daniel worked for the DeWitts, a quiet boy. He left town right after that probate quarrel." "Right after," I repeated. "Yes. He didn't want any part of it. He was sensible." Marion leaned forward. "Did you see him leave?" Helen Crow smiled kindly. "My dear, nobody sees a young man leave town. They hear he has gone and then they see the empty space." That was a nice sentence and it sounded practiced. I said, "You remember the probate quarrel?" "Oh, yes," Helen Crow said. "It wasn't like the papers said. People argued, but it was all settled. Martin Laird was very capable. He made sure everyone understood it would be easier to close things properly." Her tone was too generous. "People do not speak of capable men who close family quarrels quickly, unless those men have made an impression or left instructions. I said, "Where were you when the quarrel happened?" "In town," she said. "I was teaching then." "And you heard about it afterward?" "Yes." "And you heard Daniel Orr left willingly?" "Yes." She sipped her tea, and her memory shone like a tabletop polished too often. That was my first real clue. True recollection has roughness. It has odd details that do not help a story. It has uncertainty. This was smooth, I pressed gently. "Mrs. Crowe, how do you know he left willingly?" Her eyes remained kind. "Because there was talk. People said he had an aunt in Poughkeepsie. People said he had always wanted to go." "People," I said. "Which people?" She blinked once. "Oh, the usual. At the market. At church." "That's vague," I said. "This is a man who might be alive, dead, or buried in paperwork. Vague won't do." Marian's voice came out tight. "My father died because he asked questions people didn't want asked. If Daniel Orr vanished, someone made sure a story replaced him. I need to know whose story you are repeating." Helen Crowe's kindness hardened slightly, as if she were dealing with a student who had become rude. "Miss Keene, I am not repeating a story. I am remembering what was known." "That's exactly how stories survive," I said. "They get called known." Helen Crowe set her cup down with care. "You are both very upset." "Yes," I said. "It is contagious." I leaned forward a little, keeping my voice level. "Mrs. Crowe, did you ever speak to Daniel Orr after the quarrel?" "No," she admitted. "Did you ever see him after that week?" "No." "Then you do not remember him leaving." "You remember being told he left?" Her eyes narrowed. "Is there a difference?" "There's the difference between a line on a map and the land under it," I said. Marian watched her, silent now, but intense. Helen Crowe's hands tightened, then relaxed. "All right," she said. "I did not see him depart. I did not watch him board a train. I only knew what was said." "And who said it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not much. Enough." I said, "Walter Bryce." That made her flinch, just slightly, as if his name had a hook in it. "Yes," she said quietly. "Walter." "Tell me," I said, "in what capacity the courthouse clerk told a schoolteacher where a farmhand went?" Her chin lifted. "Walter grew up here. He was always involved. People asked him because he was at the courthouse and he knew papers. And he told everyone Daniel Orr left willingly," I said. "Yes. Did anyone ask why a farmhand witness would leave town right after a probate quarrel?" Helen Crowe spread her hands. "People ask many things, and then they go back to work. You know that." I did. It is how evil survives in small towns. It does not need conspiracy. It needs fatigue. Marian said, "My father would not have gone back to work." Helen Crowe looked at her with a mixture of admiration and annoyance. "Your father was not like other men." "No," Marian said. "That's why he's dead." Silence sat with us for a moment. I asked, "Do you remember anything else about Daniel Orr?" "Not the polished version, the rough version." Helen Crowe closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, the shine was gone. For the first time she looked older. "He was nervous," she said. "After that week, he came to the schoolyard once looking for my husband. My husband used to help on the DeWitt farm in harvest season. Daniel asked him whether he should talk. To anyone official." "Official," I repeated. "Police?" Helen Crowe nodded. "My husband said it was not his business. Daniel said it might become everyone's business." "And then?" "And then," she said softly, "Walter Bryce came by my house 2 days later. He said Daniel had gone. He said it was best not to stir things. He said the family had settled it, and the county did not need more trouble." That was the roughness I had been waiting for. Not a perfect recollection, but a human one. "Did Bryce threaten you?" I asked. "No," she said. "He didn't have to. He spoke like a man who knows which doors open and which stay shut." Marian's hands clenched. "Did anyone ever look for Daniel Orr?" Helen Crowe swallowed. "No, not seriously. People said he had left. They were relieved. A missing farmhand is sad. A farmhand who tells stories about land and families is inconvenient. I stood. "Thank you, Mrs. Crow." She looked up at me. "You think something happened to him?" "I think," I said, "that your memory was fenced by someone else's words. Wolfe says false memory is the cheapest fence ever built. It's also the first to collapse." Helen Crow's voice was almost a whisper. "Then be careful. When fences collapse, people get hurt." "We already noticed," Marion said. On the drive back to the city, Marion was silent for a long time. Then she said, "My father was looking for Daniel Orr." "Yes," I said. "Or for what Orr saw. And Bryce has been rehearsing the story for 20 years, she said. "Polishing it," I agreed, "like a tabletop." When we reached the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office with the map and my notes arranged like a small trial. He looked at Marion, then at me. "Well?" he asked. I told him. Helen Crow's polished certainty, her admission that she never saw Orr leave. Her confession that she had only repeated what Walter Bryce said at the time. The detail about Orr asking whether he should speak to someone official, and Bryce visiting 2 days later to say it was best not to stir things because the family had settled it. Wolfe listened without moving. When I finished, he said, "Good." "Good?" I asked. "Yes. False memory is the cheapest fence ever built, and often the first to collapse." Marion said, "Then Bryce lied." Wolfe nodded. He did not merely lie. He supplied a story that relieved the town of responsibility. A witness who vanished becomes a nuisance. A witness who left willingly becomes a comfort. "So, Daniel Orr didn't leave," I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "He may have left in some manner, but not in the manner Bryce rehearsed. And if Orr intended to speak to someone official, and if Bryce discouraged it, then the buried event your father traced had a human observer. That observer became inconvenient." Marion's voice was steady now, steady in the way grief becomes when it finds a target. "So my father was pointing to where Orr went?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Or where Orr saw someone go and not return." He leaned back. "Archie, now we have the skeleton of the story. A probate dispute that closed. Too quickly. A late-entered transfer copied from a missing ledger page. A boundary marker placed to enforce a false line. A route that points to a hidden creek bank. A witness, Daniel Orr, who did not depart as the town was told. And a clerk, Walter Bryce, who remembers too well because he has rehearsed." I said, "And Martin Laird behind the curtain." Wolfe's lips moved in faint displeasure. "Yes. The capable man who made everything easier." He looked at Marion. "Miss Keene, your father was measuring a story because someone had replaced truth with convenience. He found the place where the convenience began to rot." Marion nodded. "And they killed him." Wolfe's eyes hardened. "Yes. Tomorrow we will have Mr. Bryce, Mr. Laird, and Mr. Kramer in this office. We will remove the fence. Then we will see who falls." That night, while Fritz served dinner with an air of determined normality, I could not stop thinking of Helen Crow's polished memory finally cracking. It is always like that. A lie repeated for years becomes smooth enough to sell, until one question scratches it and the old rough wood shows through. False memory is cheap. It costs only the willingness of decent people to accept comfort. And when it collapses, it does not do so quietly. Chapter 7. The route between silence and inheritance. By mid-morning, the office in the brownstone had taken on that prepared stillness it gets when Wolfe means to assemble a conclusion and expects someone to dislike it. The chairs were in their places. The lamp on Wolfe's desk was adjusted. The map lay open, held flat at the corners. Fritz had already complained once that arguments belonged in courtrooms and not in houses where sources were trying to live dignified lives. Wolfe ignored him and told me, "Bring them at 2. "Which them?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes lifted. "All the living who have been living off that old omission. Mr. Bryce, Mr. Laird, Inspector Kramer, Miss Keene. And if your fraud, Mr. Ritchie, can be located, he too." Ritchie is a moving target, I said. Then do not aim poorly, Wolfe replied. Kramer handled the aiming for us. At noon, he telephoned to announce with obvious annoyance that Joel Ritchie had been found, not heroically. He had been found in a diner off the Parkway, eating eggs as if fraud were a breakfast habit. Kramer's men had brought him in for questioning, and he was now in a mood to cooperate if cooperation meant fewer bruises. He'll be at your house at 2, Kramer said. If he tries to run, I'll staple him to your doormat. You'll ruin the wood, I told him. At 2 o'clock, they arrived in the order Wolfe preferred, not by courtesy, but by effect. Marion Keene came first, because grief belongs in the room if justice means anything besides procedure. She sat near my desk, chin lifted, hands folded, tight enough to show the strain. Inspector Kramer arrived next, broad and impatient, with pearly Stebbins posted near the wall like a moral bracket. Walter Bryce came in with a neat suit and a neat smile, the smooth clerk face I already distrusted. Martin Laird came last of the civilians, tall, well-dressed and calm in the way of a man who believes calm is a right purchased long ago. Joel. Ritchie was brought in between Kramer's men like a parcel being delivered for inspection. Ritchie looked smaller in our office than he likely did in his own mirror. He had the slick hair, the busy eyes, and the mouth of a man whose best skill is sounding sincere for 12 seconds at a time. Wolfe remained seated behind his desk, large and still. He let them settle and let the silence do some work first. Then he said, "We are not here to admire maps. We are here because Amos Keene is dead, and because his death was not accidental. It was preventative." Laird smiled faintly. "That is an assertion, Mr. Wolfe." "It is a conclusion," Wolfe said. "The assertions were made long ago in Westchester with paper and a missing man." Bryce said smoothly, "If this concerns county filings, I have already explained that everything was proper." Wolfe looked at him. "Yes. You explained it with a polish that suggests rehearsal. We will remove the polish." Kramer grunted approval. Ritchie looked at the floor. Marion Keene watched Wolfe as if he were the only fixed point in the room. Wolfe said, "Years ago, a probate dispute involving the DeWitt estate ended too quickly. A transfer tied to an easement, and the mill road was entered months late. It was copied from a page no longer in the bound ledger. That missing page covered the same stretch of time Amos Keene had been studying before he died." Bryce started to speak, but Wolfe raised a hand. "No," Wolfe said, "do not repeat. I have heard your lines and they are dull." He turned his gaze to Martin Laird. "Mr. Laird, you married Elise DeWitt. You assisted in closing the probate. You employed counsel, and last week you hired Mr. Joel Ritchie, who is not a title professional but a fraud, to obtain copies of easement maps tied to the mill." Laird's expression did not change much. "I did not hire a fraud. I hired a man to run errands." Ritchie opened his mouth, then shut it when Kramer looked at him. Wolfe continued, "You were prompted to run those errands because Amos Keene began asking questions. He asked the county clerk for old filings. Someone called the next day asking whether—" Keene had asked, "That is not curiosity, that is surveillance." Kramer said, "We've got the phone record." Laird looked at Kramer and shrugged. "I do not control who calls the clerk." "No," Wolfe said. "You control what you fear." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Now we come to the root. Mr. Goodwin traced the properties on Keene's map, fold, and discovered they are linked less by borders than by family arrangements, marriages, mortgages, quiet debt. The mill site is the hub. The route on the folded map is not a boundary. It is a corridor of connection." Marion Keene said, "My father said it was movement." "Yes," Wolfe told her. And he was right. He was tracing movement, not ownership. Wolfe reached for the map and tapped it once with his finger, not hard, but enough to make it feel like evidence. "Daniel Orr," he said. Bryce's eyes flickered. Laird did not move. Ritchie swallowed. Wolfe said, "Daniel Orr was a farmhand, present, near the mill lane on the evening of the probate quarrel. He intended to speak to someone official. He asked about it. 2 days later, Mr. Bryce visited the local schoolteacher and told her Orr had left town willingly and it was best not to stir things. That story became comfort, and comfort became fence. Bryce's voice sharpened. "That is hearsay." Wolfe's eyes cut to him. "Yes, and it served you well. The cheapest fence ever built is false memory. You built it with talk." Bryce flushed. "I did nothing improper," Wolfe said. "You remember." "Too well, that is the problem. You remember because you have been repeating," Kramer said. "We can argue about memory later. Where does Amos Keene's murder fit?" Wolfe nodded. "Here." He looked at Marion Keene. "Miss Keene, your father found a rusted boundary marker in weeds on a lane near the creek. Its placement made no sense as a true property corner. It only made sense if a property line had been shifted after the fact to redirect attention and create a false corridor." Marion nodded once. "He said the marker was wrong." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Wrong as a boundary, correct as a signal." Wolfe's gaze moved back to Laird and Bryce. "Years ago, Daniel Orr saw the real marker before it was moved, or before its meaning was altered by paper. He understood that the probate map and easement filings had been changed to redirect a strip of land, and, more importantly, redirect a route of passage. That redirection allowed a parcel to move through marriage and debt, but it also allowed something else to be concealed." "What?" Kramer demanded. Wolfe paused, and in that pause the office went tight. "A night," Wolfe said. "A meeting. A confrontation and a disappearance." Ritchie blurted. "I don't know anything about that." Kramer's head snapped toward him. "Shut up unless you're answering." Wolfe raised a hand again. "Mr. Ritchie, you will speak soon enough." He continued, voice steady. "The land was redrawn not to enlarge an estate. The acreage is trivial. It was redrawn to cover where Daniel Orr had once gone and never returned. The creek bank hidden from the road, aligned by the false line, is not valuable land. It is valuable concealment." Bryce said, "That is speculation." Wolfe said, "It is inference supported by fact. A missing witness. A rehearsed story of departure. A missing ledger page. A late-entered transfer copied from a page that vanished. A boundary marker placed where it could only serve deceit. And now, Amos Keene dead at his kitchen table after studying that same stretch of time." Laird leaned back slightly. "You still have not connected Amos Keene's death to me." Wolfe nodded. "We will." Amos Keene rediscovered the shift while reviewing county lines. He folded the map to show the route Daniel Orr must have taken on the night he vanished. Not because Keene wanted to find land, but because he wanted to find the point where silence became inheritance. Marion's breath caught at that, and I did not blame her. Wolfe continued. Keene's measured ground was about to produce measured guilt. Someone realized that if a surveyor put his conclusion into a form the county must acknowledge, the old fraud and the old disappearance would become present facts. That could destroy reputations, holdings, and the comfortable web of marriage and debt that has protected it. Kramer said, "So someone killed Keene to stop him?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "And since the person most threatened by the reopening of this matter is the person who benefited from the old arrangement, we need only see who moved first when Keene began asking." Wolfe turned to Ritchie. "Mr. Ritchie, you were hired to copy easement maps. By whom?" Ritchie licked his lips. "Mr. Laird." Laird's face stayed calm, but his eyes hardened. "I hired him to retrieve documents. That is not a crime." Wolfe said, "No, it is a symptom. Why did you need those documents last week after 20 years of peace?" Laird said, "Because an old man was stirring nonsense." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, and you feared the nonsense because it was not nonsense." Kramer leaned forward. "All right. How did Keene die?" Wolfe glanced at him. "The medical examiner will tell you. But the posture, the spectacles set down, the coffee half finished, and the absence of struggle suggest he was interrupted by someone he did not expect to fight in his kitchen. A familiar visitor, a neighbor, someone invoking county business, perhaps even offering to help." Marion's voice was tight. "Like a title man." "Yes," Wolfe said. Or a man pretending to be one. Everyone looked at Richie. Richie threw up his hands. I never went near that old man. I only copied papers. Kramer said, we'll check your movements. Wolfe said, he need not have done it. Mr. Laird has others. Money buys errands. It also buys silence. Laird's smile returned, thin. You are weaving a story, Mr. Wolfe. No, Wolfe said. I am unweaving one. Your story has been kept intact for 20 years by paperwork and polite memory. Amos Keene began correcting it, and correction is dangerous to men who live. On smooth filing, Bryce snapped. You have no proof I did anything wrong. Wolfe's eyes shifted to him. You supplied the town with a rumor that Daniel Orr left willingly. You did so without seeing him depart. You did so in order to prevent official curiosity. That alone is misconduct if viewed honestly. Bryce's face reddened. I did it to keep peace, Wolfe nodded. Yes, peace is often the name criminals give to silence. Kramer said, Where's the body of Daniel Orr? Wolfe's voice remained steady. On the creek bank likely, or in the creek, or moved elsewhere. We do not need it in my office. You need it for your case, and you have men for it. But we do need this. A clear understanding of why Amos Keene died. He turned to Marion Keene. Your father was measuring not land but guilt. He discovered that the boundary marker in the weeds did not mark a property corner. It marked a lie. And he folded his map to show the route between properties that carried that lie forward through inheritance. Marion's eyes were bright now. So my father's last fold was a warning. Yes, Wolfe said, and a direction. He was saying, look here, this is where the story turns. Wolfe's gaze returned to Laird, and the air in the office changed. Wolfe does not shout, but he can make a sentence feel like a verdict before it is spoken. Mr. Laird, he said, you have been protected by 2 cheap fences. One is paper, filed too smoothly. The other is memory repeated until it shines. Both fences are collapsing. If you did not order Amos Keene's death, you are still responsible for the conditions that made it necessary for someone to order it. If you did order it, you will soon face consequences that do not fold neatly. Laird's calm held, but it was now effort. This is melodrama. Wolfe's mouth tightened. No. Melodrama involves applause. This involves handcuffs. Kramer rose. That's my line, Wolfe nodded. Then use it intelligently. Hold Mr. Richie. Investigate Mr. Laird's contacts and movements during the hours before Keene's death, and examine Mr. Bryce's ledger alterations, including the missing page and the late entry. You will also send men to the creek bank, quietly, because bodies dislike publicity. Kramer grunted and motioned to his men. Richie was escorted out, protesting. Bryce stood, face stiff. I will not be accused based on gossip from an old schoolteacher. Wolfe looked at him. You will be questioned based on your own polished memory. That is always evidence. Laird did not rise. He merely looked at Wolfe with a new expression, calculating now rather than calm. You think you have me, he said. Wolfe said, I think you have been living between silence and inheritance for a long time. Amos Keene stepped onto the root and refused to be silent. That is why he is dead. Marion Keene stood slowly, hands still folded. My father wanted the truth measured, Wolfe nodded. And it will be. Measurements do not forgive. Kramer took Bryce with him, not in cuffs yet, but in the manner of a man who knows the hallway is narrowing. Laird left under his own power, which often means he has not yet understood how little power remains. When the office had emptied, Wolfe sat back and closed his eyes. Fritz entered with coffee and a look that demanded we remember dinner's schedule. I said, You didn't give them the whole buried event. No, Wolfe said, because we do not yet know its full shape, but we know its function. It created a route that carried profit and silence together. And Daniel Orr. He was the first to see the route, Wolfe said, and therefore the first to be removed from it. I looked at the map on the desk, a crooked path between scattered properties, now less a line on paper than a corridor, between 2 human instincts, fear and greed. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie, your dead surveyor measured a story. The murderer killed him because measured ground was about to produce measured guilt. That is the simplest motive in the world." "Fear." "Of a ruler," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said, "and the truth is always the sharper edge." Chapter 8. Wolfe reads the land. Allowed by 4 o'clock. The office had the look of a room that had been warned. The chairs stood where they were meant to stand. The curtains were half drawn against a watery March light. Wolfe's desk was clear, except for one object that did not belong in Manhattan at all, a county map that smelled faintly of other people's damp drawers. Fritz had arranged coffee and a plate of little biscuits with the air of a man performing civility under protest. Wolfe sat behind his desk, large and still, waiting. I was at my own desk with a pad ready, and the feeling that the land itself had been asked to testify and would not do it without some fuss. Inspector Kramer arrived first, because he likes to enter a room as if the room owes him money. Pearlie Stebbins followed and took his place near the wall, notebook out, eyes steady. Marion Keene came in next, dressed plainly, face controlled, grief now sharpened into purpose. Helen Crow was brought in behind her, small and upright, holding her handbag with both hands as if it were the last respectable thing left. Walter Bryce arrived with his clerk's smoothness applied freshly, tie straight, expression calm. Martin Laird came with him, well-dressed, composed, and wearing the kind of confidence that takes years to grow and one afternoon to lose. Jonathan Crandall, pulled in by Kramer's men from Westchester, arrived last. Big hands, farm shoulders, distrust on his face. Kramer shut the door himself, which meant he intended to keep the air in the room from escaping until it had done its work. Wolfe did not greet them. He let them sit and feel the quiet. When he spoke, it was with the mildness that always alarms people more than shouting. "We will proceed," he said, "because delay is the ally of rehearsed memory." Bryce's mouth tightened slightly. Helen Crow looked at the floor. Laird's eyes remained on Wolfe as if he were assessing cost. Wolfe lifted the map and held it up, not dramatically, only so everyone could see it. "This," he said, "is the last deliberate act of Amos Keene." Marion's fingers tightened on her handbag strap. "The map was folded," Wolfe continued, "in a sequence no surveyor would use for convenience. It hid acreage lines and displayed a crooked path between scattered properties. Mr. Goodwin has shown that the path is not a boundary. It is a route. A route is not drawn for ownership. It is drawn for movement." Crandall shifted in his chair. "That's what I told Goodwin. That easement line never got used for anything decent." Wolfe nodded once. "Indeed. Now, for 20 years you have been told a story. That the DeWitt probate was closed properly and peacefully. That a farmhand named Daniel Orr left town willingly. That the Mill Road easement was routine. That a boundary marker was where it belonged. That any missing parcel existed only in the imagination of a cranky surveyor." He lowered the map and looked directly at Bryce. "You supplied much of that story, Mr. Bryce." Bryce's smile appeared, polished and quick. "I filed records. I did not write stories." Wolfe's eyes remained steady. "You filed them too smoothly." He turned a page on his desk, not to read, but to show he had paper of his own. "The transfer tied to the mill easement was entered months late," Wolfe said. "It was copied from a page no longer in the bound ledger. That missing page covered the same period Amos Keene was studying before he died. The explanation offered was damage. Yet the numbering in the ledger was adjusted, and a modern margin note was added later. You wrote that note, Bryce said. I made a clarifying annotation years after the fact. Clarifying, Wolfe repeated, is an ambitious word for a man polishing absence. Kramer leaned forward. Bryce, I'll get to you when Wolfe's done. Don't think the word games are saving you, Wolfe continued. A boundary marker was found in weeds on a lane near the creek behind the mill. Its placement made no sense as a true property corner. It made sense only if a line had been shifted, or claimed to be shifted, so that the route would direct attention past the mill and toward a creek bank hidden from the road. Helen Crow raised her eyes. You mean where Daniel Orr went? Yes, Wolfe said, not unkindly. where Daniel Orr went on the night he vanished and where someone else went with him. Helen Crow swallowed. I never saw him go. No, Wolfe said. You only repeated what you were told. Kramer's head turned. Crow, for the record, who told you? Helen Crow's voice was small but steady now. Walter Bryce. He came to my house and said Daniel had left willingly and it was best not to stir things. Bryce snapped, That is nonsense. Wolfe did not look at him. It is not nonsense. It is mechanism. False memory is the cheapest fence ever built, and it holds as long as decent people accept comfort. Marion Keene said, My father did not accept it. No, Wolfe said. That is why he is dead. The room tightened. Laird's expression did not change, but his hands moved once, then stilled. Wolfe said, Now listen carefully, because the land is simpler than you are. Years ago, during the probate quarrel, Daniel Orr saw the true boundary marker before the record was adjusted to redirect a strip of land and the associated rite of passage. He understood the map had been altered. He intended to speak to someone, official because he asked whether he should. That intention made him dangerous, Crandall muttered. I always wondered what happened to him. Wolfe nodded. You wondered, and you returned to work. That is how fences stay standing. He looked at Bryce again. You supplied the town with the rumor that Orr left willingly. You did so without seeing him depart. You did so to prevent inquiry. Meanwhile, the ledger page that recorded the original transfer sequence vanished, and the late entry appeared months later, copied from what was no longer available for inspection. Bryce's smoothness tried to hold. You cannot prove I removed any page. Wolfe's tone remained mild. No, but I can prove you benefited from its absence, and I can prove you rehearsed its explanation. Kramer said, And we can prove. The phone calls last week. Laird had a fraud copying easement maps, and someone called the clerk's office asking if Keene had asked for records. That's not a church social. Wolfe raised a hand slightly. Yes, now we come to Amos Keene. He lifted the map again and placed it on the desk in front of him. Then he did something Wolfe rarely does. He traced with his finger along the crooked path the fold had displayed. Keene was not measuring acreage, Wolfe said. He was measuring memory. He revisited deeds and easements and probate papers as though correcting a story. Then he found the boundary marker in the weeds, the hard bone that refused to match the paper. He understood the line had been shifted. He folded his map to show the route Daniel Orr must have taken on the night he vanished. Marion's voice was tight. He left it for me. He left it for anyone willing to see, Wolfe said. A surveyor trusts lines more than speech. Laird spoke finally. This is an impressive narrative, Mr. Wolfe, but you still have not shown I murdered Amos Keene. Wolfe looked at him with calm contempt. You are too eager to confine the discussion to the second death. Your comfort has been purchased by many small silences. Kramer barked, Answer him. Did he do it or not? Wolfe replied, Keene died because he was about to turn measured ground into measured guilt. He was not merely thinking, he was preparing to make his findings official. Once a surveyor submits a corrected line with supporting record, paper must respond. That would have reopened the old probate and dragged up the disappearance of Daniel. Or it threatened the branch of the family that profited from the redirected transfer, the branch that traveled through marriage and debt to Mr. Laird. Laird's eyes hardened. That is motive, not proof, Wolfe nodded. Correct. Therefore, we speak of Mr. Bryce. Bryce's smile was gone now. His face looked older, as if the polish had been rubbed off. Wolfe said, Mr. Bryce, you helped cover Orr's disappearance to protect the altered transfer. You did not do it from affection. You did it because you were part of the arrangement. A clerk who controls timing controls truth. A missing page and a late entry can redirect property quietly, and quiet enrichment is the best kind. For decades that enrichment held because a witness vanished and the rumor of his willing departure made fraud safe. Helen Crow whispered, Walter, why? Bryce did not look at her. Kramer said, Bryce, I'm asking you now, where is Daniel Orr? Bryce's jaw worked. I don't know. Wolfe said, You know where he did not go. He did not leave town with a suitcase and— A wave. Bryce's eyes flicked toward Laird for a fraction of a second. That was enough. It was not confession, but it was direction. And Wolfe had set the room so small directions could be seen. Wolfe said, Mr. Laird, you hired Mr. Ritchie last week to copy easement maps because you were afraid Amos Keene had found the marker. You attempted to learn what he knew. Someone then visited Keene, and Keene died at his kitchen table, spectacles set down, coffee unfinished, with no sign of struggle. That suggests a visitor he did not fear enough to fight until it was too late. Marion's hands trembled once, and then steadied. Kramer said, We're checking Laird's movements. If he was near Keene's house that morning, I'll have him. Wolfe nodded. Yes, that is your portion. Mine is to show the mechanism of the story. He looked at Marion. Your father's fold was not an oddity. It was a guide through altered ownership, moved markers, and a vanished witness buried beneath a geography of lies. Bryce filed the lie. Laird profited from it. And when Keene began to correct it, someone ended him. Crandall's voice came rough. You're saying land got redrawn to hide a killing. Wolfe said, Not to hide a killing alone. To hide a place, a creek bank hidden from the road, aligned by a false line. The murderer believed geography would bury the truth. Kramer stood up. But land doesn't bury anything. It just waits for a shovel. Wolfe's eyes lifted. Precisely. Land remembers where men stood even after paper forgets. Bryce's face collapsed a fraction, not into tears, but into something like defeat. Helen Crow spoke softly. Daniel was just a boy, Wolfe said, and therefore easy to erase if one has a clerk and a story. Kramer pointed at Bryce. All right, you're coming with me. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. He rose slowly, the neat clerk finally moving. Like a man carrying weight, Laird stood as well, too smoothly. This is outrageous. Kramer's eyes were cold. Sit down, Laird. You're not leaving yet, not until I'm done asking. Purley moved to the door. For once, the office felt like a courtroom that had learned manners. Wolfe did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Mr. Laird, he said, you have lived comfortably on an old adjustment. You treated land as if it were paper. But paper is obedient only until someone reads it with intent. Amos Keene read it. He measured it. He died for it. Marion Keene stood. My father wanted the truth measured. Wolfe nodded. And it will be. You will have your measurements, and Mr. Kramer will have his. Martin Laird will find that old lines can still convict. Kramer took Bryce out first. Laird was kept for further questions. Helen Crow sat a moment longer, eyes wet now, and then rose and left with Marion, who held her elbow gently as if guiding an old teacher through a lesson she had never wanted. When the door closed and the house resumed its normal hush, Fritz entered with coffee, his expression relieved in the way only a man who has protected dinner schedules can be relieved. I said to Wolfe, You read the land aloud. Yes, Wolfe said, and Bryce built the fence. Yes, and it collapsed. Wolfe lifted his cup and sniffed. Fences built from talk collapse easily when confronted by a fact that rusts. I leaned back. You ended dry. Wolfe looked at me. Dryness is appropriate. Mud belongs in Westchester. I could not argue. The map lay on his desk, still folded in that stubborn, wrong way that had turned out to be correct for a different purpose. It had been a guide, not to land, but to the silence built around Daniel Orr's disappearance and Amos Keene's murder. And once Wolfe had read it aloud, silence had begun, at last, to sound like guilt.